Electronic discovery, or e-discovery, has always required some digital forensic skills as litigators prepare to present electronic data at trial. However, as technology evolves, likewise, the skills needed to identify, collect, and analyze the data that's most relevant to a case. Joining us to talk about that today on the Forensic Focus podcast is Kyle Campbell, Vice President of Litigation Support at Frontline Managed Services and a longtime e-discovery expert. I'm your podcast host, Christa Miller. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Christa. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So I'm going to start with, I've worked adjacent to e-discovery for about the last decade. And it seems like although the same fundamental issues haven't changed much, we're still talking about intellectual property, trade secret theft, harassment, various forms of employee misconduct, disputes, and so on. The technology environment has changed a lot in that time. Going through the articles that you've written extensively about these issues, one of your articles referred to these changes as the volume, velocity, and variety of data. So bearing in mind time and monetary costs, how do digital forensics teams supporting e-discovery now ensure a thorough but proportional investigation?
Yeah, absolutely. My 20-some years in the industry, I've had much the same experience you had. The issues seem to stay fairly static, but there's a lot the changes and the details and the ephemeral around those issues have just changed dynamically. But one of the biggest changes I think I personally have experienced has just been kind of the breakdown of the divide between digital forensics and e-discovery work, and the tasks in which the professionals that specialize in those disciplines perform. When I started in the industry, very much siloed operations, and even when I came to the company that that I was at, that was acquired by Frontline, the company I was at before was called Logicforce. There was almost no interaction between the forensics and the e-discovery teams, except to almost literally throw data over the wall, as it were, to one another. So, over time, that has really broken down, and I think in a good way. And when I really first got started in e-discovery work, a supervisor that I had at a law firm that I was working for sent me to a digital forensics training course in Dallas, Texas. It was conducted by a gentleman named Jason Park, who is still a pretty widely recognized expert in the digital forensics field, and I think a fantastic resource. And really, the goal of attending the training was to get that understanding about what digital forensics entailed, so I could be conversant about it, not only to the forensics investigators with whom we'd work on a semi-regular basis, but also with the clients and the case teams with whom I'd work. So, as I've grown in the industry, I've really adopted and maintained that mentality, especially here with my team at Frontline. And I think it's imperative that professionals in both disciplines have at least that baseline understanding of what one another's roles are, where the division of labors lie. Our divisions of labor lie. And I think the biggest thing that digital forensics professionals can really do to support their e-discovery colleagues include, really just, understanding that fundamental need to forensically preserve data in a sound fashion and in a repeatable, defensible fashion. Because if that cornerstone doesn't exist in, the onset of any case, then everything downstream gets affected or can be affected and is at risk. So then secondly, I think that the biggest thing, and especially from a collaboration standpoint, is for both groups, digital forensics investigators and e-discovery professionals, to establish budgetary guidelines with the case team. So that so that we're not suggesting solutions to these data issues that are just going to completely blow proportionality out of the water, as it were, and make sure that they're adhering to those guidelines that have kind of become more and more codified within the American legal court system at the very least. And then next is to be aware of what the ultimate end game is with respect to the case team's e-discovery obligations. So a forensics expert just kind of understanding what that end goal is, and then kind of work backwards from that, so that when they start to really get to the meat of what they're recommending, that those recommendations are not only sound in from a best practices perspective, but also are going to meet that ultimate goal of the case team in dealing with the data. And then from there, just being able to educate the case team as to what those options are, be able to speak to them in a plain language and in a fashion so that it doesn't necessarily overwhelm the case team with the nuances of the data and stuff. A
Yeah.
lot of them are kind of like the end consumer of the sausage from the sausage factory. They don't care how they got into the casing and what went into all that. They just know that they like that sausage at the end of the day. And then finally, just strong documentation. Just document everything along the way. Not only what you're doing from a task by task perspective and preservation and so on, but really documenting the decisions that everyone arrives at throughout the course of those discussions and through that educational process, so that preserved data that that they've been tasked with acquiring not only has been done in that defensible fashion, but is also going to meet the needs of the discovery team downstream, and then ultimately the case team at the end of the day, so that they can properly present that evidence throughout the course of the litigation.
That's really interesting, because I think that as I've been doing some research on biasability in digital forensics, it seems like documenting those decisions helps to mitigate some of the challenges that have been identified in some of the literature about that.
Absolutely, and we have situations where cases come back years after we've done the bulk of our work, and for instance, we had a criminal matter in which someone who was convicted of the crimes of which they were accused started up an appeal process from prison, and has gone back and found that he felt as though he wasn't properly represented by the counsel that engaged us to help him. And so we've had to go back to that documentation, some of the reports that we've generated, and provide what we feel is appropriate, working through our counsel as well at this stage, what we feel is appropriate, because if I understand correctly, his former attorneys were even sanctioned at some point, not for that matter necessarily, but for other matters. And so he felt as though that was some basis for him to reveal. So that documentation that we established early on in that case and carried throughout the life cycle of that case has been vital for us to be able to go back and answer these questions and provide the input necessary to either facilitate or to at least shore up the work that we did in being able to help the case team arrive at their final outcome.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit. As we've been talking about the overlap between digital forensics and e-discovery specifically, I know your employer Frontline also offers a range of managed services to law firms, including administrative, financial, and IT, in addition to litigation support. And I'm wondering, in addition to the overlap between digital forensics and e-discovery, are you also seeing overlap between those skills for incident response? And I'm thinking of like ransomware attacks on law firms, or sort of similar potential for data breaches.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Frontline, you're right. We do provide this breadth of services to our law firms, and we often kind of cross over our service lines to touch base with our colleagues in different departments to get an idea of not only what they would recommend in certain situations, but we're sometimes engaged in helping those law firm clients properly preserve their data. I was just contacted by a client yesterday, as a matter of fact, the general counsel of a law firm who's one of their long-term clients has an employee who's been indicted or has been subpoenaed on a federal matter, and they suspect that there's potential risk for the overall organization to be indicted. And so we're working with a lot of our internal teams our IT resources that support that firm specifically to do proper collection of data from their document management systems and so on. So I think the common thread that really exists throughout all of these kind of interconnected disciplines within the IT realm is managing data in a cost-effective manner, and in such a fashion that it decreases risks for exposure to bad actors, and that maintains the integrity of those data sources, so that that data can be leveraged in myriad ways downstream from its creation point, whether that's for just basic knowledge management or budgeting, or even potentially being used as evidence in a matter,
Yeah.
or in response to a subpoena in this situation. I'm really a big fan of one of the core tenets of complexity science, which is really that interconnectivity of complex systems, and how that they're just tendrils that kind of force what seem to be maybe on the outside as completely separate systems or disciplines, that they do truly have some interconnectivity. And then I think that really holds true within the IT realms as well. And so there's absolutely aspects of the disciplines that cross over. That other example that we handled a few years back was that an executive of a company for one of our law firm clients, he left that company, went to work for a competitor, and took with him a bunch of IP, or intellectual property. And so, acting upon a motion to compel by the court, in which the employer had sued that former employee, we were tasked with preserving that employee's phone, the drive from his laptop, a USB connected hard drive, and his personal webmail account, to try to find incidents, items that he had collected, or that he had taken with him that we knew belonged to him. So we relied on file hash signatures to identify, just one-to-one matches within on those various devices that we preserved. But further, we also had some aspects of e-discovery needs involved there, because what he had done is not only had he just wholesale use some of that IP, we also copied and pasted pieces that were necessary or that he felt were more helpful for him at his current organization. So we had to use some near duplicate analysis with some of our e-discovery tools to be able to find these segments that he had copied and pasted into new documentation and IP that at his new organization. So there's absolutely crossover, and when it comes to incidents response and all of these types of situations, there are at least tools or knowledge and experience that can be relied on both sides of that situation, from the forensics and the e-discovery side of things.
So underpinning some of these, or most of this conversation, is that the biggest changes in enterprise data, in data in general, information technology in the last decade has one of them has been the shift to cloud storage, and as well, everyday life and society is becoming more digitized. So against this backdrop, I guess, what additional technology shifts do you see on the horizon affecting these issues with collection and documentation, and what do you anticipate the future will be for data sources and volumes?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm gonna kind of show my vintage here a little bit, and I remember a time in which law firms were absolutely no way, no how are we going to put our data in the cloud? We have to control it.
Yeah.
Our clients demand it, and so on and so forth. And that's drastically changed now to where clients value the security that a cloud solution can offer. That's a lot of what Frontline is doing right now, is modernizing the law firm back office operation and technological footprint to go from on-prem storage to cloud storage. And so a lot of the changes that I think, I'm not going to fancy myself as a big brain, like real forward thinking technologist. I like to live a little more in the now, and a few years down the line, but like 20, 30 years, that's probably a little bit beyond my reach. But what I would say is that I think we're going to continue to see increase in complexity and then that interconnectivity of data sources. A great example is a lot of the forensic acquisition softwares that are out there now have some of those data enrichment capabilities, in which after you image a device, a mobile device, for instance, and are able to acquire the tokens for the user's social media accounts, with a single click of a button, you can suddenly not only pull down the data you harvested from the physical device, but now you can also pull in the data from their social media accounts, their other applications they've got running on their phone. So again, that increased interconnectivity of the data, I think, is only going to to compound as time goes on and different applications are developed. Devices really continue to be those hubs through which we operate many aspects of our lives, both business
Yeah.
and personal. And everything, all understanding the ways in which people conduct their lives in this fashion, it's going to continue to make it more crucial when it comes to preserving and analyzing and potentially producing
Yeah.
that relevant data in a litigation. From beyond that, just the increasing, from the American state side, we already know that a lot of international countries have very strong data privacy
Yep.
legislation and policies in place, and I think the American government entities are finally catching up to that. I would see more and more states that are passing data legislation, data privacy legislation, and so I think that there's that's going to continue to be a factor that we contend with, and I think maybe reach a point at which there will be more broad federal guidelines establishing data privacy rights for individuals and consumers out there.
Yeah.
There's several basic tenets of data security coupled with appropriate scoping and strict adherence to e-discovery protocol that can exist in mitigating those privacy violation risks.
Right.
Encryption at rest and transit, role-based access controls for all users, so on and so forth. All those things are going to be issues that continue to create challenges, and we'll have to rely on our software partners and then managing our case team's expectations to really be able to overcome those challenges and do that in again that defensible fashion.
Right.
So from there, I think something else we'll see are just that continued evolution of devices and technology and the technology needed to forensically preserve them. It's blockchain technology and quantum computing. Those two things in and of themselves scare the crap out of me from an e-discovery perspective. But just the general explosion of applications that already have a lot of the forensic acquisition companies out there, software companies and hardware providers out there, just in a constant state of catch up, trying to figure out what's new, what's next, and how their tools can again properly preserve that data. I kind of fear that at some point that the pace may outstrip some of the capabilities from a development standpoint of a lot of the forensic providers or the technology providers that are out there, or at the very least continue to drive up the costs in such a fashion that it makes it almost cost prohibitive for smaller organization or even independent practitioners to be able to afford those tools and technologies that are out there. We probably see that to a great extent already. And I will also kind of further just riffing on that idea is going to come to a point where the only organizations or people that are going to be able to develop the tools that are necessary to properly acquire or download or whatever, however you want to term it, to properly preserve that data are only the application developers who built the app in the first place going to be the only ones that are going to be capable of properly acquiring that stuff. And to that end, are they going to have the appetite to do so? Is that going to be a defensible stance when it comes to authenticating that evidence that the manufacturer of the software is the only one that can do that? So those are all things that I kind of just kind of concern myself with as far as that application development is concerned. And then finally, I think we're going to continue to see the evolution of the case law. I mean, on a daily basis, we see new precedents and decisions that are set in the courts that that involve e-discovery and involve forensic preservation and aspects of the cases. Courts have obviously been a little slower to recognize and set precedents when it comes. They've been, to really understand and embrace these technological changes. But I think and I think that the pace at which the applications and the data complexity changes just compounds that issues with the courts. And so I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. And I think it's just incumbent upon us as professionals and, those trusted partners on whom, law firms and corporate clients are relying to stay abreast of the issues, stay abreast of these decisions that are being made, and really understand the way in which they can affect those day-to-day, cases that we work on and we're engaged to support.
Yeah, it's there's really I know you've written about this, I think, the need for e-discovery and digital forensics professionals to adapt to all of these changes and these shifts by specifically developing skills in information governance, data privacy, and data security. You talked a little bit about that. Could you explain a little bit more about why these skills will be so important to a future in e-discovery?
Absolutely. So when it comes to, one of the things I'm a strong proponent of, again, at least having that conversant level of understanding around information governance for folks that are working in forensics and e-discovery. And I think understanding that the need for corporations to create policies that are realistic, that meet their regulatory obligations where applicable, and that are policies that can be readily followed or automated. You have to understand how those affect your work downstream, because you may get into a situation, it happens all the time where, we're working with a corporate client of a law firm that's engaged us, and we start to ask the questions, okay, what happened to this department of employees, mail data? What happened to their user share on your server or in your cloud environment? And the IT people, with whom we're trying to find out and scope this collection, will say, well, we don't have that anymore. And the initial response is always one of panic when it comes to the attorneys that I've worked with. Usually, what do you mean we don't have it? And if they're able to pull out a set of policies and guidelines that they've established that show that not only that they have the policies, but most importantly that they follow those policies, and that they and that they have key controls to help automate those policies to the extent possible, it becomes a kind of an unanswerable, I won't say unanswerable, it becomes kind of a moot point as far as to, well, what happened and why do we need to get that person's data? If it's a very strong established precedent in the courts that businesses have a right to operate in a way that's cost effective, and so long as, again, it meets any regulatory obligations under which they fall, they've got to be able to operate their business in a way that's sound for them. And so I think being able to answer those questions and understand, for an e-discovery or forensics investigator or professional, to be able to understand those policies and be able to say, yeah, okay, look, these are the controls, and be able to just kind of run those topics down with the IT professionals and with the executives of these corporate entities, I think is a huge skill set for people to be able to to take into those conversations and to bring value to those conversations with their case teams, and be able to prove that they've, that they're a worthy engagement and a worthy partner for those firms. As far as data privacy is concerned, again, we've talked about that it's already huge in America and in European countries, and more states are adopting guidelines. And I think, again, in understanding how data privacy can throw up hurdles or can cause a preservation process to have to take a few twists and turns in the road in order to not only be as diligent with those preservations as they possibly can be, but also to understand that that there are certain guidelines and laws that they have to follow in terms of utilizing that data downstream from the collection, and making sure that, again, the policies and the appropriate acknowledgments have been made by those employees whose data may be getting preserved in the course of a matter. That all of that stuff is, all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and so that when they're preserving that, they're doing so in a manner that abides by those regulations and those policies. And then finally, I think that the importance of these skills comes down to just be able to properly advise the attorneys with whom you're working and by whom you're engaged in those corporate entities, what the best practices are in these situations. I had a conversation with a gentleman who started up a pretty large law firm's in-house e-discovery operation, and he said, in those situations where we do have to engage outside providers, we don't want a bunch of start button engineers. We don't want just a data jockey that's just going to take whatever we give them and bring no value to those conversations and bring no value to that service that they're providing, that support. And that's what I really try to instill upon my folks and other professionals with whom I engage in the industry. Make sure you're bringing value to this conversation. Make sure you're bringing insight, so that you may not solve all the problems in a single conversation or two with the case team and with those and with their corporate clients. But what you're going to do is establish a trust level and establish yourself as an advisor with that firm and potentially with that corporate client, through which you may get future work and future engagements and things. And so I think just in terms of maintaining the viability of your individual practice and your own career path, all of those things really help to to establish that and engender that trust and that recognition as an trusted advisor.
You're kind of keying on another question that I had about communication being so central to a digital forensics professional skill set. So as you know, we're talking about the complexity of technology. It's becoming more abstract, certainly, in addition to more complex. How can digital forensics analysts educate attorneys so that they in turn can educate judges toward making good case law? And what indications do you have whether this is actually working or not?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the best thing to do is really to go back to basics. I think technology professionals in general, in my experience, don't like to directly interface with with the wetware. They're much more comfortable dealing with the hardware, right? And
Sure.
and I've had to overcome that in my own career as well. And so I think that just the best approach I could recommend would really just to dial it back to basics. Work on your ability to speak with people, and work on that ability to be able to to really take those complex issues and boil them down to the brass tacks and be able to speak in that plain language, to not only provide guidance and be able to provide recommendations about how best to approach things, but really to be able to answer the challenges you face. And I mean, because you can have a established set of protocols, you can have a plan that everyone has agreed to and is abiding by, and then you're going to encounter some sort of a hurdle. And to be able to properly enunciate what that hurdle is, and more importantly, be able to see and explain what the options are to get around that hurdle, really serve. I think really are going to serve people well as they pursue their career. I can't really see much. Again, just kind of dialing it back to basics. One of the things I felt was always good practice for me was describing to my friends, and my family outside of the industry what I do for a living, and really just being able to practice using terms of art as far as the discipline is concerned, as far as my job was concerned, but not having to cognitively or critically think through. Okay, I can't disclose this kind of a detail. I can't disclose this kind of a detail. But I can kind of just give these, just at least paint the picture. And I think that honestly, that's what a lot of case teams with whom I've worked and attorneys with whom I've worked in the past appreciate, is being able to, just kind of be able to filter out all the really complex details, but still provide the information that's critical for making those decisions to get through those challenges. I actually think the advent of collaboration platforms like Zoom and Teams has been a huge benefit for technology professionals in that regard, and that we can still have a face-to-face conversation here, but we're doing so over the over the portal that's facilitated by technology, and so I think that it takes some of the edge off of that, and again allows a lot of, to me, in my experience, it seems like it allows people to be able to think through those challenges and those topics that they need to address, and do so, and be able to present their sides and their explanations in a sound and concise fashion. Aside from that, as far as the courts are concerned and whether or not that education is working, I would say by and large, yes. I mean, I think the ubiquity of technology just in and of itself is forcing everyone in all walks of life to understand, at least to some extent, how this stuff works. And I think that as digital forensics has grown and e-discovery has grown as practices, lawyers and then subsequently the courts and judges really have had no choice but to really understand it. And there's been things codified in like the attorney's code of ethics and things like that that force them to at least from an ethical obligation standpoint, to understand technology to be able to properly advise their clients. And so that's certainly been helpful. And I think that I certainly see some of the decisions that are rendered, especially on the federal level, really do show some increased nuanced understanding of how these data sources are maintained and how they can be acquired, and then further how technology can be leveraged to make to really slice down these big data troves and get them to a point at which they're manageable and, more importantly, affordable, proportional to the matters and the claims in a particular case. So I think it's getting there. Maybe not certainly not at the pace at which technology is changing. That's a whole other issue. But I think that at least I think that just how much everyone's business and personal lives are inundated with technology today really just force everyone to at least come to some degree of understanding of how this stuff works and what it means for them and their particular careers.
You actually just touched on something that I wanted to ask, which was what technology has created in terms of volume, velocity, and variety. Technology also helps professionals to manage. So how do you anticipate the tools will need to adapt, and how will skill building help professionals in turn to shape and evaluate these tools?
It's a really great question, and I think that again, advocate just taking a step back and try to dial it back to basics as much as possible. Professionals have to be willing to do that on a daily basis and be able to critically think through what is happening. I say that that's born of a lot of personal experience, and then I just get so mired into just trying to drill through my brain how something, a challenge has occurred or a problem has arisen, and just go down those rabbit holes. And you've got to be able to extricate yourself from those rabbit holes a little bit and take a look at that bigger picture. Ask yourself the questions: did I execute this preservation correctly? Did I follow the protocols that we have established? Were there problems in the protocols that we have established that now we may need to kind of pivot and take care of? And if not, and how do we not only address this issue here, but how do we prevent encountering the issue going forward? From there, just be willing to research and learn about the experiences of other professionals. Forensic Focus has been a tremendous resource for me personally, a lot of my colleagues professionally and personally as well. There's part of one of the benefits of this explosion in data has been the explosion of information about that data and about those data sources. And so being able to again take your step back from drilling down that rabbit hole and saying, okay, where are some of the resources I can explore to find more information, to reach out, get into my personal or professional network and try to leverage some of these people with whom I've made connections over time and get their experience and find out how they would have handled the situation. Again, I think you can do so. And I think, some of what we just talked about a moment ago, being able to clearly speak about and describe the situation that you're facing without getting into those details that may cause some issue or some, inadvertent kind of disclosure of details that are confidential, it really serves you well in being able to identify and find solutions to these issues. And then finally, just being able to engage in open dialogue with your tech provider, your software or hardware providers, support teams. Again, I think egos sometimes cloud the picture as well in our industry. And I think that people have this hesitancy to call tech support when there should be tech support. They're the ones on whom a lot of people rely for these types of situations. And so I think just being able to set that aside a little bit and go to the people that manufacture these tools that we use and understand that they're, because again of the pace and the velocity at which these technologies change, that they're not always going to be able to build the perfect solution in the first, in the previous release or in the next release and so on. And so working with those providers, we have to do this a lot on the discovery side, especially being able to interface openly with those support technicians to be able to describe the problem that you're facing and being able to escalate things up the chain so that your issues are addressed in a timely fashion so that you can then circle back and address the issue that you're facing, I think is imperative as well. And then finally, off kind of in that same vein, being able to, once you recognize you've got a challenge you're having difficulty overcoming, being able to go back to your clients that have engaged you, whether it's a case team or a corporate entity, and manage their expectations. Again, describe in that plain language what's going on, and give them realistic answers about, because the first thing is, well, how long is this going to take to resolve?
Right. And
being able to say I don't know is fine, but you can't just come right out and say I don't know and have no other explanation for it. So being able to have had that conversation with support, being able to say, the timeline's not real clear right now. However, I've got A, B, and C people. I've escalated this issue up to some of the lead developers that are our technology provider and our partners, and they're on it, and they're going to give me updates. And here's the cadence in which those updates are going to come, so that you can in turn provide those updates in a timely fashion in your case. And those are all very important aspects of that.
So final question, although it's a little bit of a big one. I'm feeling as you're talking like these are the kinds of skills and situations that might benefit from somewhat unconventional career pathways. But I do want to put the question to you. What do you see as some career pathways towards these skills, towards all of these skills, or even developing brand new skills?
So one of the more, to me, one of the most straightforward ways in which you can do that is, again, just work collaboratively, both with the people, if you're a part of a company like Frontline, work with your colleagues, work with people that may be outside of your particular department, but understand what they're doing, and just understanding how their particular tasks can, lead to a path downstream to what you're working on. I think that just that collaboration, reaching out to your network, reaching out to your colleagues is a huge thing. And simply understanding how data passes through, that post-preservation workflow within an organization can lead to a lot of insight for a digital forensics professional, to understanding, how their preservations processes can affect people downstream from them. And I think that just opens up your mind into doing that. But I think more specifically, there are organizations like the International Association of Privacy Professionals, or IAPP, that offer a lot of training and resources and certifications at a fairly reasonable cost, to be able to again, at least establish that baseline understanding. They've got materials that are available. I think I bought one of their kind of the privacy professional prep guides for like $75, and now, after having read that and gearing myself up towards taking the CPPE certification. So I think that there are resources that are out there, and you just have to be willing to invest in yourself a little bit in that regard. Then there are ediscovery and data governance staffing agencies, whose websites and principles are, the folks in those companies are consistently generating content out there for consumption that is oftentimes free, especially for professionals already kind of in the industry. One of them that comes to mind is True Staffing Partners. The True has, I've noticed in the last couple of years, has really made a big push toward hiring, like kind of looking for professionals already in the e-discovery or forensics world, and working with them to leverage those skills to take that next step into data governance and data privacy related roles within organizations. And I believe they even offer some scholarship opportunities with, again, organizations like IAPP, wherein they can, a professional can, mitigate some of those costs or absolve themselves of some of those costs in pursuing that training and those certifications that are needed to take on those roles. So there are definitely resources that are evolving out there, and I think that just by, kind of leveraging your network, leveraging your LinkedIn network or your personal professional network to explore what some of those avenues are, I think can really lead you into those career paths if you're looking to make a bit of a change.
That's great information. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, Kyle, thank you again for joining us on the Forensic Focus podcast.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you having me. And, I'd like to, just put it out there that if any listeners want to connect up with me, they can reach me at Campbell at frontlinems.com. Love to have, again, be a part of someone's network, be able to provide some advice and whatnot, or to just, sit down and share a virtual beer and commiserate about issues that we've all encountered. So no, I appreciate you having me, Christa. It's been great, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, it's been a really good conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks also to our listeners. You'll be able to find this recording and transcript along with more articles, information, and forums at www.forensicfocus.com. Stay safe and well.